On the line is the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Jason Miyares. Always good to chat with him. Sir, good to have you back with us.
Great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, as always. Tell me what's on your plate these days. I know you're very focused on early voting in Virginia. What's happening in the Attorney General's office?
Well, I mean, I think early voting is starting September 22nd, and the elections this fall are huge. I mean, there's a reason why Joe Biden's approval rating is in the low 40s in Virginia, and Governor Youngkin's approval rating is getting closer to 60% because people recognize the work we're doing. As dysfunctional as D.C. has become, Virginia is the opposite. The governor has, instituted a variety of common sense reform. And just in his first year in office, he found over $1 billion of waste that he saved. He's tried to return and has returned over $1 billion to taxpayers. He stood with police instead of trying to defund the police. But the reality is, as much good work as the governor and we've been able to do in Richmond, we getting blocked by a lot of these initiatives being blocked by a far left-wing state senate.
Right.
And so we launched SecureYourVoteVirginia.com to get people in the game, ready to vote early because the stakes going to be higher. The Democratic-controlled state senate is signing with fentanyl dealers instead of family members and prosecutors. They're signing with big tech when the governor is attempting to try to protect our children and their data for being sold. They even want to siphon off our ability to control and buy non-electric vehicles by ceding Virginia's emission standards to an unelected board in California.
Yeah.
So those are some of the stakes this fall that are there, and that's why we're out on the road. And I'm out on the road right now, doing another event with another candidate.
There's a long list of items, and you just mentioned some of them. But boy, that fuel standard, the emission standard, is one of the nuttiest. State Democrats are preventing Virginia from getting out of a suicide pact with California. And if there's a reason to put Republicans in charge, that's definitely near the top of the list.
Right. This is a North America regulation back when they had complete far left monopoly in Richmond. They passed a law tying us to this unelected board in California that said you don't even have the option of buying a gas-powered vehicle. And we warned them what they were doing. They did not care anyway. They went ahead and did this anyway. The average price of an electric vehicle in America today is $67,000. It is prohibitively expensive. If you like an electric vehicle, I have several friends that own a Tesla. They rave about it. That's great, but that's your choice. But to remove that, to force working class Virginians to essentially subsidize electric vehicles for non-Virginians, because it is not just it is a rolling date. In a few short years, it's going to be roughly a quarter, and then 50. It's a staggering scale. Then 100% of all new vehicles sold have to be EVs. Well, the only way you do that, the only way you reach those goals is you artificially inflate the price of every gas vehicle while you're still allowed to even buy them. So if you like a gas vehicle, imagine a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 surcharge being added on that, simply to try to make the prices comparable so they can move the vehicles off the lot. It's unconscionable, and to do it to an unelected body in California. And Vince, as I like to say, don't change my life without a vote. They're allowing an unelected body that's not accountable to anybody in Virginia fundamentally change how Virginians live and work and commute. And I just think that's wrong. And the only way to pass forward is to get a new General Assembly that's not paying attention more to what happens in California than what happens in Virginia.
I want to shift gears to a different topic. In Virginia, certainly one that you've been very focused on. For a time, you were fighting for the release of a report in Loudoun County about the sexual assaults that had taken place there in that school. And it was just released in the last week. And honestly, I'm reading through it, going over it on the air. It's jaw-dropping, truly, what Loudoun County did to its students and to the families in that community. I'm talking about the school system there. What was your reaction to this report? And what do you think the public should glean from it? What should be the takeaways from it?
Well, I guess the main frustration I had, first of all, was just the process. This was something that, remember, they initially denied anything had really happened, and then once it became public that there was indeed a sexual assault and the student was simply transferred to another school, that they then finally said, okay, we're going to get an independent report, we're going to release it to the public, and then once it was done, again, this was paid for by taxpayers. The taxpayers paid for this report. they simply blocked its release. They said they were not going to release it. It really took our office taking them to court to get it released for us to really, do another attempt to get some transparency of what happened. And, at the end of the day, they delayed doing the right thing. And that, to me, is the mindset. That's the opposite mindset of what we should have for those on our school boards, which should be they should trust accountability and transparency. And I would remind your listeners, it was under the Northam administration, under this far-left liberal monopoly we had, where they voted to end the mandatory reporting requirement of sexual assault in schools. And so that was a decision that they made. It took really Governor Youngkin and really our reporting that in our investigation, the grand jury investigation, to really get the General Assembly, even the Democrats with the Democrat control of the Senate decided to reverse course. So the stakes are high.
Yes.
It's never too late to do the right thing. It's really a shame that it took us to do multiple court hearings and filing a motion to get this unsealed, but we're gratified that it's now public for the general public to see.
Right, and it's stories like this that are right at the center of what voters are thinking about as they head in and vote early in Virginia in this moment as these early elections begin.
Yeah, no question. And I would say that even if your listeners is a little bit wondering, well, why should I do this? If you're a listener and you get tired of all the robocalls and all the text messages and opening up your mailbox and getting a dozen different mail pieces there, we have an easy solution for you. Go to secureyourvotevirginia.com and vote early, because we get a report of who's voted. We know you voted, and you get taken off the list. And so you're no longer going to get the mailings. You're no longer going to get the robocalls or the text messages. But more importantly, if you want to make sure that we win Virginia, we have about 500,000 Virginians that we know support Governor Youngkin's policies, but they don't always vote in off-year elections. We want to communicate to them. If you want to send a message to the Biden administration, vote this fall. If you want to get off these lists, vote early, because by voting early, it means we also get to free up resources to go after and communicate to those low propensity Republican voters, those voters that maybe they only vote out once every 2 or 3 or maybe once every 4 years. And we can communicate directly with them and remind them to go vote.
Yep.
And in Georgia, early voting was great success. Governor Brian Kemp actually won early voting in Georgia on his pathway to his big win in Georgia in 2022. So when Republicans decide and conservatives decide they're going to get off the sideline and engage and win, we win. We saw that in Georgia. That's what we're trying to do now. SecureYourVoteVirginia.com. Get us to sidelines, vote early, and let's go win this thing.
Jason Miyares, I know a lot of Republican voters over the years, and certainly much more recently, had kind of resolved that if they're going to vote, they want to vote on Election Day in person on a paper ballot because they feel that's the most secure. Can you speak to the security of the election system in Virginia and why you think it's such a good idea to vote early?
Well, first of all, it locks your vote in. We know we can identify if you voted early. We can do spot checks to make sure, hey, your vote is in. But listen, I had a dear friend back in several years ago who, back when I was in the House of Delegates, Indian American doctor, he called me up and he said, I went to go vote on Election Day at the end of the day, and someone had voted in my place. And I was incredulous by this. And obviously the Democrats changed. You no longer required to have photo ID to vote in person. And I looked his name up, and there was not another individual by that name registered to vote in the entire city. It was not a case of somebody with the same name. He had a very unique name. And so by voting early, you lock your vote in for any of those type of mistaken issues. But we have a secure election system, early voting system in Virginia. I have great confidence in that. We have a fantastic election law team at the Attorney General's office as well to monitor any and all issues. But it really is important. I'm old enough to remember when Republicans used to dominate in this. The 2000 Bush v. Gore election, everybody talked about, we know what's going to push Bush over the edge. It's going to be these late arriving overseas foreign ballots with military members stationed overseas and business travelers who have to cast their ballots absentee. We used to dominate that. And then candidly, we got away from it. Well, the Democrats didn't. And they really went after aggressively this idea of absentee balloting and early voting. And listen, we have 45-day no excuse early voting and absentee balloting. Those are the rules of the game. And you could sit back on the sidelines and say we're going to complain, or you could say we're going to get off the sidelines, we're going to go win. That's what has happened in Georgia. That's what's happened in a couple other areas where Republicans have decided, hey, we're not going to complain anymore. We're going to go win. Let's go win. That's what we did in 2021. And realize this, use these rules. We won in 2021 by their rules. We maximized the vote in rural areas, some counties where it could take you 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get to your polling place. We said, hey, listen, we got early voting in Virginia. You can go lock your vote in and secure your vote early. That's what we did in 2021. We had a record turnout in rural Virginia that helped propel us and captured the Virginia House. And so I think it's so important to understand we can use these to our advantages. Other Republicans, not only do we use it to our advantage in 2021, states like Georgia use it to their advantage in 2022. Let's go out. Let's go win this thing.
I don't know. I want to ask you, do you have a position on whether or not voters should write in candidates in certain cases? Because in Fairfax County in particular, we've been hearing quite a bit. Steve Descano is the Commonwealth's attorney. He's running there unopposed at the moment. Although in that race, there was a Democrat who was a much better alternative who lost the primary sort of barely by the name of Ed Nuttall. Do you support people writing in, for instance, Ed Nuttall in Fairfax County over Steve Descano?
I mean, at this stage, I think Deputy Dogg would probably be a more effective prosecutor in Fairfax than Steve Descano. I mean, this is an individual who views himself as a social worker, not a prosecutor. And Steve Descano walks into a courtroom and he sees two victims. He sees obviously the victim of the crime, but that he also views the criminal defendant as a victim. And I have met with so many victims from Fairfax that have quietly come to see me, asked to meet with me. People that have their stories are simply heartbreaking. Their stories of what they have seen, the idea that you have this criminal first, victim last mindset. I mean, in Fairfax, they will not prosecute entire categories of crime, the low-pros categories of crime, and it's killing and really hurting so many of our retail merchants that are just dealing with so much in the organized retail crime theft. And too many folks in Fairfax looking over their shoulder in fear, and he's not doing his job. So I think he's completely ineffective as a prosecutor. I wouldn't even call him a prosecutor. I call him a social worker. That's exactly what he is.
And then finally, on this issue of crime, a lot of people concerned about that, certainly in the D.C. metro area. You and I have talked about this as the crime is out of control, especially in the district. What is a Republican control? What does the Republican-controlled Senate, should that come to pass, mean for Virginia, and what can Republicans do to help resolve the crime problems that exist, including in Virginia?
Well, what we could do is what we can control in Virginia. We launch Operation Ceasefire. We're going aggressively after those that are using guns in the commission of a felony in federal court to go after those. The reality is, Vince, study after study has shown that roughly 3 to 5% of violent offenders are committing over 50% of the violent crime. If you want to lower violent crime, you go after those violent repeat offenders. You don't do cashless bail. You don't change the rules with a presumption against changing the rule and presumption against bail, or it's a revolving door. That's what you need to do. And there is such a disconnect between how the legacy media covers this issue and where the general public is right now. I just did a town hall in inner city Roanoke with both some pastors and some elected officials there, and the level of frustration in some of our urban communities. I had one individual who said, in my neighborhood, we joke that they're in by 9 and out by 5, that they get arrested by 9 o'clock and we see them back on the street by 5 o'clock. Those are some of the rules that were changed in the North America that we want to get done, but it's a huge, huge problem. It's why on Operation Ceasefire, we're trying to bring a lot of these repeat violent offenders in federal court where there's some enhanced penalties. But that's the reality is between 1992 and 2018, violent crime in this country plummeted. Why? Because we had mandatory minimums. We did not have the early release of violent offenders. If you got arrested and you got convicted, you had to serve 85% of your time. Well, violent crime plummeted during that time period, and they say the only thing you learn from history is nobody learns from history. There's nothing being proposed by either these social justice woke prosecutors or by these far-left D.C. City Council that was not tried in the 1970s. All of these so-called social justice reforms, they were tried in the 1970s with disastrous result, led to a crime explosion in the 80s. And then you saw a pushback. We learned some very, very hard lessons that now tragically we have forgotten. And as we moved away from them, the same spike in violent crime we saw in the 1970s when these same measures were adopted, we're seeing now today. So what we could do is control what we are in D.C. I'm gravely concerned about the spike in carjacking. I've been in communication with different officials about the spike in carjacking in the district, because so many Northern Virginians obviously commute towards the district, and it's hurting. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, there is data that shows that poverty can help produce crime, but there's enormous data that shows crime can create poverty. That 2/3 of all new jobs are created by small business owners, and small businesses do not locate in high crime area, and they flee high crime areas. And that's why you have these terms entering our American language like food deserts, where grocery stores and retail shops cannot survive because the margins are so tight, so they close shop, and people don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. It's a tragedy. It hurts so many communities, and that needs to end, and we're going to do our part in Virginia to push back on that.
Yeah, please do. All right, so the website is secureyourvotevirginia.com. The guest is the Attorney General of Virginia, Jason Miyares. Always nice to talk to you, sir. Thank you for your time today.